The stars of A&E's #1 rated show.
People love the show Storage Wars, where folks gamble on whether the clutter in abandoned storage units is trash or treasure, sometimes worth millions.
Storage Wars made them famous. What came next? Nobody aired. Barry Weiss woke up in an ICU. Daryl Sheets was 2 days from a funeral he never knew was being planned. Mark Ballelo served jail time, came back to the cameras, and then disappeared in a way no production company ever addressed on screen. These weren't rumors. These were real events that happened while the show kept airing, while fans kept watching, and while A&E said absolutely nothing. One cast member received death threats at her home address. One survived a stroke nobody saw coming. One never came back at all. The full story stays buried until right now. Stay with us. The man who went federal, Mark Ballelo, walked into Storage Wars Season 2 like he owned every room he entered. Brandy Passante gave him the nickname Rico Suave on camera, and it stuck immediately because it fit him perfectly. He spent freely, moved fast at every auction, and carried the kind of confidence that made other buyers nervous before the bidding even started. Viewers liked him because he never pretended to be anything other than exactly what he was, a man who knew what he wanted, went after it, and did not apologize for how he operated. But before any of that television fame arrived, Ballelo already had a criminal record that the show never addressed directly on air. A drug conviction in 2009 landed him on probation. The conditions of that probation were clear. He was not permitted to carry a firearm, and he was not permitted to cross state lines without authorization. While still serving that probation period, he did both. He crossed state lines carrying a firearm. His explanation when the matter came to court was straightforward. He said he had found the weapon inside a storage unit he had purchased and had not known what to do with it. The court did not treat that explanation as a legal defense. The facts were not disputed. Transporting a firearm across state lines while on active federal probation was a federal violation, separate from whatever the original conviction had been. A judge sentenced him to 45 days in jail. He served every one of those days. When he came out, he returned to the show. The audience had moved on, or had never known in the first place. The auctions continued. His name stayed on the call sheet.
This is great. Ballelo and Ballelo are going at it, and I've got a front row seat.
I've got $500, $5 1/4, $5.25 in your house. I've got $5 1/4.
And the cameras treated it like a gap in filming rather than a federal sentence. That pattern, something serious happening, the show continuing without acknowledging it, would repeat itself in a far more permanent way. In February 2013, Ballelo was arrested again on a drug possession charge. He was processed and released. That night, he contacted his fiancée, Elizabeth Metzus, and told her directly that he was not doing well mentally. He used the word unstable. He asked her not to leave him alone at his office. Elizabeth stayed with him through the evening. She watched him, sat with him, and remained until the situation appeared to calm down and things seemed to settle. Then she left. The following morning, Mark Ballelo was found dead inside his vehicle.
Mark Ballelo, the A&E reality TV star of the show Storage Wars, has died at the age of 40.
The cause was carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigators ruled his death a suicide. He was 37 years old. He left behind Elizabeth, young children who had grown up watching their father on television, and an entire community that had organized charity events and raised money for autism causes in his name. People who had never met him personally showed up to those events because of who he appeared to be on screen. Storage Wars never aired a tribute segment. There was no farewell episode, no moment set aside to acknowledge what had happened. The following week's content continued as scheduled. His name appeared in reruns for years afterward without any additional context for viewers who had not heard the news. The show that made him recognizable treated his absence exactly the way it had treated his jail sentence, by not treating it at all. 2 days from a funeral. Daryl Sheets spent more than 2 decades buying storage units before a single camera crew knew his name existed. He knew how to read a unit in seconds, knew what to bid and when to walk away, and brought his son Brandon into that same world with him. But the story that defined Daryl Sheets most completely had nothing to do with any auction the show ever filmed.
Hundreds of high-ticket items, but I'm stepping up to auctioneer just to make sure we get top dollar.
In 1988, long before reality television had found him, Sheets opened a storage unit in San Diego. What he found inside was not furniture, not collectibles, not the kind of unexpected treasure that would later make for compelling television. He found a body. A woman, killed by her husband. The unit was connected to an active police investigation that extended into occult activity, and detectives moved in immediately once the discovery was reported. Everything inside the unit was seized as evidence. Items that Sheets had already begun sorting through were taken along with everything else. But he was not compensated for the purchase price of the unit. He was not permitted to keep a single item from inside it. He walked away with nothing except the memory of what he had seen, and that memory stayed with him for the next 2 decades before any camera crew ever asked him about it. He said very little publicly over the years. When interviewers brought it up, he described it as not pleasant and said he preferred not to go further. In a 2012 interview, he added only what police had told him at the time. The body was a woman. The husband was responsible, and the unit was connected to an active occult investigation. That was the extent of what he shared, and he shared it only because the questions kept coming, not because he ever volunteered the information on his own. He carried that story through his entire television career, he recounting the outline of it to interviewers who had been born after it happened. Then came March 2019. Sheets was at a Justin Timberlake concert when the symptoms started. He had not been feeling well for months. He had noticed something was off, had registered that his body was not operating the way it should, and had not gone to a doctor. He kept moving, kept working, kept treating it as something that would resolve on its own. It did not resolve on its own. At the hospital, the picture that emerged was serious across multiple fronts. His left anterior descending artery, the artery cardiologists refer to as the widowmaker because of how quickly a blockage there becomes fatal, was 95% blocked. Alongside that, doctors found a lung infection he had been carrying with no knowing it. They also confirmed he was diabetic, a diagnosis he had not previously received. Surgeons placed 2 stents and treated him for congestive heart failure. The widowmaker designation is not informal. A blockage in that specific artery cuts off blood supply to the largest portion of the heart muscle. Sheets had been walking around with a 95% blockage for an unknown period of time, attending concerts, going about his life, while his heart was operating on a fraction of its normal capacity. Then came the second piece of information, delivered after the surgery. He had not suffered 1 heart attack. He had suffered 2, back to back, without being aware that either had occurred. His body had gone through 2 separate cardiac events, and he had experienced both of them without knowing what they were. He was 1 or 2 days from dying. That was the medical assessment. Not weeks. It's not months. 1 or 2 days. The ICU nobody filmed Barry Weiss was never the most conventional cast member on Storage Wars, and that was precisely why viewers kept watching him. He was not there to build a business or establish a brand. He was there because the world of storage auctions happened to overlap with his genuine love for unusual objects, rare finds.
I don't know, dude. This is looking really good. This is not looking like costume jewelry at all.
And things that other people had stopped paying attention to. He built a spin-off called Buried Treasure in 2014, used it to go further into the world of rare and unusual collecting, and then walked away from television entirely when he was ready. No dramatic exit, no farewell season. He simply returned to the life he had before the cameras arrived. Motorcycles, rare cars, a schedule that answered to nobody, and the kind of freedom that comes from not needing the attention. On April 2019, Weiss and his close friend Jaime were riding motorcycles through the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. It was an ordinary ride through a neighborhood both of them knew. Then a car pulled out of a parking lot without seeing them and struck them directly. Jaime's injuries were serious. He broke his knee, his elbow, and his wrist in the impact. For Weiss, it was significantly worse. He was transported to the ICU. The damage to his femur and his back required multiple surgeries. The femur is the longest and strongest bone in the human body, and a fracture serious enough to require multiple surgical interventions means the impact was not minor. Back injuries in a collision at speed carry their own separate complications, particularly regarding recovery time and long-term mobility. Jaime posted on Instagram while Weiss was still in the operating room. He told followers directly that his friend had serious chest and leg trauma and asked for prayers. That post was the first public information anyone had about what had happened. Weiss spent weeks in the hospital. The rehabilitation process that followed was extended. Getting back to normal activity after that level of orthopedic damage takes months of structured work. And Weiss went through that entire process without making it into public content or building a recovery narrative around it. When he returned to Storage Wars in 2021, he arrived at an auction location in a 1939 Lincoln Zephyr he had sourced himself.
This is my 1939 Lincoln Zephyr. The car was built about 20 years ago. It was called Scrape. It was built by Terry Cook.
No acknowledgement of the 2 years that had passed, or what had happened during them. He just showed up. At the same energy, the same approach, the same complete absence of interest in making his personal life into television content. That consistency between who he was before the accident and who he was when he came back was more revealing than any interview would have been. The ICU, the surgeries, the months of rehabilitation. He moved through all of it and came out the other side as the same person who had walked away from television in the first place. The charge that never closed. Jared Schultz and Brandy Passante built something that extended well beyond a television dynamic. From the first season of Storage Wars, their chemistry was one of the most reliable elements the show had. Viewers returned partly because of the auctions and partly because of the way they interacted, disagreed, pushed each other, and kept coming back to the same table. A&E formalized that chemistry with a spin-off in 2014. Brandy and Jared, Married to the Job. The title was factually inaccurate. They were never married, but it captured how completely their lives had merged by that point. They had children together. They filmed together. They built a version of public life that made the separation, when it came, feel like it arrived without warning. By 2020, they had quietly separated. The split was not announced publicly until the season 13 premiere in 2021, which meant there was a gap of roughly a year during which the relationship had ended, but the public version of it had not yet caught up. Passante had been raising their children full-time during that period, managing a household alone while still appearing on an active television series that had originally been built around the two of them as a unit. That was the baseline before anything else happened. On April 30th, 2021, Schultz and Passante crossed paths at a bar in Orange County, California. According to the prosecution's account, a verbal argument escalated and turned physical. Schultz left the scene before police arrived. No arrest was made that night. The Orange County District Attorney's Office later confirmed that Schultz had been charged with 1 count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery. He denied that any physical contact had occurred. Passante returned for season 14 without him. She did not release a formal statement about the charge, about the separation, or about anything that had happened between them. What she did instead was post a photo of a tattoo on her wrist. It described living without fear. It did not name anyone or reference any specific event directly. It did not need to. The legal case, as of 2026, has no confirmed public resolution. No conviction has been recorded. No dismissal has been announced. The charge remains open, which means Schultz has been carrying it publicly for nearly 5 years, without a final legal outcome either way. He has not appeared on Storage Wars since 2021. The show continued without him. Passante continued without him. The audience adjusted without him. The voice that almost went silent. Most viewers who watched Storage Wars for years could not have told you Dan Dodson's name. They knew his voice, the fast cadence, the rhythm of the auction call, the ability to control a room full of competitive buyers and keep everything moving at pace. That was Dodson, every single time. And the show would not have functioned without it. He and his wife Laura had built American Auctioneers together long before any television crew approached them. The business was theirs, the expertise was genuine, and when Storage Wars came looking for an auctioneer, they found someone who did not need the show to validate what he already knew how to do. June 2014. The warning signs appeared the night before the collapse, though neither Dan nor Laura recognized them for what they were at the time. Laura noticed that Dan was asking questions in bed that did not make sense. The next morning, Dan got out of the shower and went down. Laura called 911 immediately. While they waited for the ambulance to arrive, she and their son performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on the floor. Dan turned blue and then green beneath them as they worked. The wait for emergency services in that kind of situation does not pass quickly. At the hospital, doctors found 2 brain aneurysms. A subarachnoid hemorrhage is a specific and serious type of stroke.
If you imagine that the brain is, of course, inside your skull and it floats in fluid, which is called the cerebrospinal fluid, and subarachnoid hemorrhage is bleeding into that fluid.
It is caused by bleeding in the space surrounding the brain rather than within the brain tissue itself, and it carries a high rate of fatality and permanent neurological damage even among patients who receive immediate treatment. His odds of surviving surgery were 20% at best. That figure came from his medical team, not from a general statistic. That was the assessment for Dan Dodson specifically, based on the severity of the findings. He survived the surgery. His neurologist later identified the absence of severe internal bleeding as the key factor that made survival possible. The hemorrhage had been serious enough to cause the collapse and require immediate surgical intervention, but had stopped short of the level of bleeding that would have made the outcome different. From his hospital bed that same week, the same week as the surgery, while still in recovery, Dan told Laura he was finished with smoking. That week, in that bed, he made the decision and stated it directly. He went back to auctioneering. The rehabilitation process for a subarachnoid hemorrhage is not short. A neurological recovery of that kind typically involves months of structured rehabilitation. Then he walked back onto the auction floor. Same pace, same volume. The crew was there, and the auctioneer, who had been given a 20% chance of surviving his own surgery, called the bids exactly the way he always had. Storage Wars sold the audience on auctions. What it never sold was the full story of the people running them. Mark Ballelo never got a farewell segment. Daryl Sheets came within 2 days of dying, and the show never mentioned it. Barry Weiss spent weeks in an ICU and came back without a single dramatic moment about it. Dan Dodson survived on a 20% chance and walked back onto the auction floor as if nothing had happened. The cameras caught the bids. They missed everything else. If A&E brought the original cast back for one final season in 2026, who do you think would actually show up? And who would refuse? Drop your answer below. Like the video if this surprised you. The next one is already on your screen.